Hello, today on my channel you will hear an amazing story about life. I hope you enjoy this story. This one struck me to the core. Honestly, I still can't forget it. Enjoy watching.
Look, it's like an American movie, Veronica said. Night, the moon. It sounded so solemn that she felt Billy was going to laugh. Besides, he didn't like the moon. That big yellow fool puts herself in the foreground for no good reason, he said. Well sees, well craters. But it shines, it shines. He imagines himself a second sun. The moon, Veronica continued, and the two on the hill at the telescope. Beautiful boy, beautiful girl. Now I'll turn to you. I'll smile in all 32 toilet teeth. A dentist told me that in the West, they put in white crowns like plumbing. I'll smile and ask, is there life on Mars? Are you interested in complex forms, or are bacteria enough? Billy was adjusting the telescope to something she didn't know. She felt rather than saw his instant, flying smile. Comparison, Veronica thought, how beautiful am I compared to him? So, an ordinary face. They were both close to 18. Veronica was short, sturdily built, with well-developed forms. Her dark brown wavy hair was cut short. Her facial features were large and regular. Dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. No jewelry, no perfume. Only Billy, and maybe Anthony Lesnikov, knew about the quiet pool in which, as you know. In short, whether Veronica is good or not is another question. It's a question of who likes it and who doesn't. But Billy, such a thin face, such eyes. You look at him, your mouth drops open and you catch your breath. You stand there and stare, and you forget what you wanted to say. A prince, the offspring of royalty. Well, Veronica's got a lot on her mind. Billy's daddy isn't a king, he's a minister. In the regional government. At least he's not an MP. Veronica almost never watches news and political programs on TV. But if a piece about the Duma flashes across the screen. Really, these grown-ups behave worse than high school bullies. Not only do they compete to see who can shout at whom, but they often pounce on each other and beat each other up. If at Veronica's school, in class, something like this happens, the class teacher, nicknamed Grimza, immediately opens the door to the corridor and shouts, Harry, Harry. Harry's the gym teacher. His build is like he's both a weightlifter and a basketball player. 2 meters tall and a little less wide. When the boys hear about Harry, they get quiet. They know Harry will take a trespasser by the scruff of the neck like a delinquent puppy and carry him out the door. He'll give them a knee to the ass. However, none of the expelled did not complain about the gym mess. They understood what was going on. And the deputies fought with impunity for the amusement of those who watched TV. Billy's mom is a ballerina, former prima ballerina at the opera and ballet theater. Now she teaches at a choreographic school. When Billy asked Veronica to visit, she always refused. She was uncomfortable. She was afraid that she would feel like a booger being unkindly scrutinized through a microscope. She hesitated to swat it or let it run. What is Veronica to them? A zero without a stick, a fatherless girl, the daughter of a Russian teacher of Russian language and literature. It's not like solving cases of national importance or dancing the part of Giselle. Billy's parents must be afraid of every girl he tries to be friends with. What if an unworthy candidate still manages to woo their son? Does he want an ordinary wife? Billy will finish school, continue his education somewhere in London, get a job in the clouds. Then he can look around and choose a wife among equals. But until then, no, no, no. And that girl in the worn jeans needs to be kept away. No, they'll talk to her politely enough, but... And what's here? Veronica snuggled up to the telescope, squinted her eyes, wrinkled her nose. It's just a bead. Well, wait till we get to the confrontation. Then everything will be to your liking, mademoiselle. You'll see polar caps, seas and storms. And about life. Remember? And he began a little chant, as if in verse, when one word gives rise to another. They lived on the planet Mars, in a house with crystal columns, on the shore of a dried-up sea, and in the mornings you could see Mrs. K, eating the golden fruits growing from the crystal walls or cleaning, scattering with handfuls of magnetic dust, which the hot wind carried away with the debris. In the evening, when the ancient sea was still and sultry, and the wine trees in the courtyard stood in torpor, and the old Martian town in the distance was all withdrawn, and no one went out into the street, Mr. K could be seen in his room, where he was reading a metal book, fingering the bulging hieroglyphics like the strings of a harp. And the book sang beneath his hand, the sing-song voice of antiquity telling of a time when the sea covered the shores with scarlet mist, and the ancients went to battle armed with swarms of metal hornets and electric spiders. Billy's voice was melodious and solemn, like he was repeating a prayer. Veronica had never heard those lines before, but they fascinated her. She remembered the last production of The Master and Margarita with the same triumphant calmness, as if he was dictated from above. The artist spoke of the white cloak with a bloody lining of the rider of Pontius Pilate. "Wow," said Veronica, "you should not be a scientist, but a fiction writer." "Are you kidding?" "Shame on you. It's Bradbury. The Martian Chronicles. I can memorize most of it by heart. Would you stop it?" Billy heard his mother's voice so clearly, as if Catherine were standing next to him. "How many times do you have to play with your stars? You're 18 years old, you've grown to be a Kolominsky Versta, and you're still playing with your stars. Who's to blame for this?" Billy would ask, "You and your Selena." Not so often, but his mother still took him to visit her friends. They were all young then, all dancing. Billy knew what was waiting for him there. Women as thin, as smooth-haired as his mother, and the same veins on their high foreheads. And the talk was rapturous, about ballet, the stage, the roles, the teachers. He remembered his mother's friend Selena talking about her mentor. Insulting. He said all sorts of nasty things. "You wouldn't let me go on stage until I was in tears, so I danced through my tears. And now I'm grateful to him, Mother of God. The theater is a real shithole. You can't say a sincere word. If you laugh once, they'll make up something about you." And now she looked at Billy and said, "Whatever. I'll dance on the ruins of the stage, even if they blow up a bomb." Mom could use a little more stamina, Billy thought. He remembered going on tour with his mother to Spain. For the first few days there were no performances, only rehearsals. In the evenings, Catherine and Billy took long walks through the streets of Madrid, absorbed the foreign life, foreign antiquity. Mom said something about her roots, about how she would never get used to it here, could never leave the United States. And Billy, for him it was his first trip abroad, was staring around like a little boy. And the lights of the commercials floated before him in a glittering carousel. When they got back to the hotel, Mom realized she'd lost her room key. She became desperate. Shaking her small, rhinestone-embroidered purse, she twisted it right onto the red carpet. Like a blind woman, she swatted with her palms, groping for scattered things: powder, lipstick, a pack of tissues, a butterfly brooch, which she immediately pricked herself. And she shrank back, crying, sitting on the floor, all small, angular, finger in her mouth, licking the blood. Billy felt like he was a lifetime older than his mom. He took her other hand and spoke, emphatically, slowly, calmly, like with little children who don't understand all the words yet. "Calm down. I'll go downstairs, get someone to open the room for us. And if we can't find the key, they'll give us a spare." It'll be years before he realizes that Mom is an artist and every little thing turns into a tragedy for her. She cries and wrings her hands, grief incarnate. Billy understood this, and that the cause was trifling, but he could not remain indifferent, and his heart clenched, and he tried to comfort his mother. But her friend Selena is cheerful, and does not arrange any tragedies. Selena is concerned with earthly matters. She talks to her mother about the rehearsal schedule being prepared for one day lately. You only find out what's going to happen tomorrow the night before. It's awful inconvenient. A lesson, then rehearsals, a short break, and again rehearsals or a performance. You can't eat, you can't rest. You won't be traveling from one end of the city to the other during a short break. And the theater management seems to think that the worse it is for the artists, the better. Selena, too, lives in the ballet business, but it's short term. If you ask Billy, he'd say he hates ballet. But not because of the director's tricks, and not because his mom's not interested in anything but dancing. No, ballet had become his personal enemy on a quiet evening when he had entered his mother's room without knocking, carrying Captain Grant's children in his hands. Perhaps his mother would read to him. She was lying on the sofa, dozing, covered with a plaid. That plaid was always with her. She threw it over her shoulders as if she were a shawl, or, as she did now, she covered herself with it. All her mother's energy went to the stage. At home, she was frail, tired, always cold. She lay with her arm behind her head, stretched out, her feet bare. Billy walked over and forgot what he wanted to ask. He hadn't seen this before. He remembered his mom in high-heeled shoes. Number 33, Cinderella. And the little feet were very much in keeping with all of his mother's light, graceful appearance. And at home, Catherine invariably wore soft boots, Uggs. God, how nice, she repeated, changing her shoes, or said nothing but a blissful, relieved sigh. And what he saw now, they weren't his mom's feet. No, they belonged to some kind of monster, unnaturally long toes and little fingers as if broken. Calluses, stony dark. On the left foot, the toenail on the big toe is blue, as if it had been hit with a hammer. And this is with a mother who cares so much about every little thing for a long time. Picks out dresses, jewelry. If she goes to a party, she changes her hair several times. Billy guessed that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Mom hadn't been tortured by pinching her feet. Ugly feet and flying across the stage are two sides of the same coin. But what a painful beauty it is. Billy remembers having the same blue toenail when he accidentally jammed his hand on a door. But his mother, who elevates every trifle into a tragedy, doesn't consider pain a tragedy. It doesn't matter to her, and it doesn't matter to Aunt Selena. But he couldn't forgive his mother's suffering for the ballet. He'd always been very sensitive to pain, and when Mom was telling something hard, a story about a performance she'd been through, when she barely made it to the end, she noticed that Billy had taken hold of his whiskey. What's wrong? It hurts. It's like a bow to the heart. Mom remembered that expression, and from then on she'd ask, "Shall I tell you about the play? But there will be such a thing, like a bow to the heart. Do you want to hear it?" And that time when she felt Billy beside her, she awoke from her slumber, intercepted his gaze, and hastily wrapped her legs around him. At the same time, she smiled to show her son that it was nothing. But how beautiful, she said. Point in Russian just means point. We touch the ground with 2 points, or even 1. That's the calluses. You can only fly on calluses. And she ruffled his hair. What, do birds have calluses on their wings too? Billy asked, and as Catherine did not answer immediately, he explained to himself, they don't have calluses, they have feathers. I'll have you go to choreographic school, too, his mother said, as if it were a done deal. You'll find out what kind of life it is. He shook his head. No. But Catherine did not react to his no, apparently, just decided not to insist at that moment. However, the fate of Billy she determined for herself. Understand, she proved to her husband, who was not delighted with the fact that the son will be made ballerina of. Billy will be a perfect Siegfried. He's got the data, I realize that. Billy almost cried. Are you serious? Stop mocking me, I'm not going to dance. He imagined. Mangled fingers, the whole body hurts, and daily hard labor at the machine. Just show yourself to the commission. Just show yourself. Catherine persuaded him a few months later. What have you got to lose? Don't worry, they'll see your sour face and they'll turn you away. And let's go get ice cream. There were 3 rounds of admissions tests. Billy was amazed at how many girls. There were more girls in the crowd, after all, wanted to volunteer for the ballet galleys. Fat and thin, tall and short, haircut and bow-tied. Some are nervous and tugging at their mom's hand, others are repeating learned dance moves. Others have tears in their eyes. Billy defiantly turned away to the window. It was better to look at the rainy day, at the wet black paths in the park, to watch the drops running down the glass, than to look at this general madness, or to hear the usual boring whispering. Look, what a handsome boy. A quarter of an hour later, the handsome boy stood in front of the admission committee and, despite the fact that he was almost naked in just panties, looked at the maestros with a mocking look. All those. Turn around, raise your head, stand on your toes. He performed quickly and carelessly, and the same mockery was felt in his movements. He's a perfectly built boy, the older man said. Of course, maybe he will grow up, but for now, yes, Softly supported him a lady, as smoothly calmed, with a tuft in the back as his mother. She came over to correct his arm, and he noticed what a beautiful brooch she had on her chest, at the bottom of the deep neckline of her black dress. Blue sparks twinkled in the stone like a starry sky. The sifting was large, very large. As he and Catherine left, Billy saw tears in the eyes of not only the children, but the moms as well. In the second phase of the trials, the doctors took over. Here the rejection was less. About 100 people reached the 3rd round. Of them had to choose 30. You will play a piece of music, instructed Mom, and offered to dance. "I'll do it," thought Billy. And finally, there he was, standing in the middle of the auditorium. The accompanist is small, a little extra on top of the piano. She began to play, and Billy recognized the waltz from the first bars. And not wanting to play anything, he spread his arms and spun around the big hall, enjoying the freedom, because at home it was still cramped. Here he could run like hell. And a few minutes later, Billy opened the door. Catherine came up to meet him. "You got it?" Almost with hatred, he shouted. "I was accepted." And he walked ahead of her down the corridor with his hands in his pockets, not wanting to look back, accompanied by the whispers of the crowd. He didn't eat ice cream now either. He studied at the school for 2 years, and finally convinced that they have nothing in common with ballet. All those endless rehearsals, shouting teachers. Long leg, long leg, long leg, long leg. Step back on the left foot. Turn your foot out, let your heels smile. And this pain, which came as he expected. The dreams and excitement of his fellow students about roles, about plays, all this was absolutely alien to him. "Sweetheart," said finally to his mother, the old teacher Zakhar Maximovich, vainly tormented all this time with Billy, "do not drive in with a stick on this path. A slave is not a worshiper. Your boy doesn't want to do what I tell him to do on purpose. What do you think he's gonna do with his education? You know how stressful high school is. Don't torture your son. Put him in a regular school." For several days, Catherine was silent. Billy did not interfere with her, did not approach her with questions. He understood. Mom has to survive the collapse of the dream of his ballet career, and that soon everything would be as before, and he didn't want to be caught under the hot hand and hear harsh and unfair words. In the end, his parents put him in an English special school and took a breath. Still, not quite the ordinary way the school is a light, and the child, exhausted by the struggle with ballet, took it as a respite and learns perfectly. The only memory of the past is his mother taking him to visit Selena when she has a ballet society gathering. You'll remember later that you knew these people. Perhaps if Billy were older, he would appreciate them. But to a 12-year-old boy, talking about ballet is intolerably boring, and they don't even finish the sentence. They just start, say a couple of words and laugh. They understand everything. They are their own. Aunt Selena doesn't have a cat or a dog. Billy had already eaten the cake, and now that the diet was over, he was putting in a second piece, stretching the pleasure. With a spoon he kneaded windows in the soft biscuit and imagined that it was a knight's castle with sentries walking along the creamy roses on top. He would sit there, mentally recalling Walter Scott's novels, and the piece would quietly disappear from the saucer. At last Billy crept over to the big pale green chair and dropped his head on his arm. He sat as artistically as his mother, the embodiment of longing. Aunt Selena, passing by, stroked his hair lightly. "Poor frustrated Siegfried, do you listen? Well, here you are, at least look at this. It's a nice picture." And she put an expensive, heavy volume on his lap. It was an album called Mysteries of the Universe. Pictures taken with telescopes. Planets, stars, comets, nebulae. Billy looked at it and froze, and was lost forever. Before him lay the galaxies. Their crystal curls formed by millions of stars, seemed pierced with brown veins and cracks, and it was no longer crystal, but ancient, noble agate. And it was worth thinking how much life, and in what forms could lurk around each star spark. The inexpressibly bright tails of comets, the unearthly splashes of color. Where does the journey of these eternal wanderers begin, and where does it end? The mysterious blue of the planets, Uranus, Neptune, what lurks beneath their covers. And the names of the stars are mesmerizing: Ahurnar, Betelgeuse, and Tares. One of Billy's favorite fairy tales was the story of Jack, who threw magic seeds into the ground. Beings grew out of them, stretching into the unknown heights. "What's up there beyond the clouds?" thought Jack, and climbed up into the sky. And on the clouds stood a fairy tale castle. And there began a story that Billy had lived many times in his mind, reincarnating himself as Jack. A single cloud, a castle on it, and an enchanted princess who could be bewitched. But deep down, Billy had always known it was a fairy tale. What he saw now, however, was a truth that could be seen with his own eyes every night. And what could not be seen was confirmed by telescopes. Why did people live past this? Why was no one he knew as shocked by it as he was now? Billy knew it. By himself, by his family, they had gone years without seeing the night sky, forgetting that there were stars in the sky, busy with their own affairs, so small before this splendor, before these worlds living, breathing, pulsating. Billy believed in God. When he was an infant, his mom didn't have time to sit with him, so he had Nanny Julia. She taught him to say a short prayer before bedtime. Later, as a child of a cultured family, Billy learned, in general terms, the sacred story. But now that he was past the age of 12, he began to wonder what God was. Does he exist only for one, their planet? And in other worlds where there is life, there are their own creators? Probably so. It is impossible to imagine that God is one for the whole universe, with its immeasurable distances, that even his divine wisdom is enough for every creature in the universe, that heaven and hell are the same for everyone, for people from the planet Earth, and for intelligent cephalopods from some Alpha Centauri. Once, he had asked Nanny Dasha much simpler questions. She said, "Don't be so wise." And then she said, "To understand God is like trying to pour the ocean into a hole dug in the sand with your finger." But now no one could stop Billy from thinking about it. He tried to imagine what was going on out there, beyond the edge of the universe. And then he saw the universe as a big black ball over which God was sitting with his face bowed. And around God, everything is in a golden haze, hiding the gardens of paradise. And then Billy didn't try to imagine anything else, because the Garden of Eden has the right to infinity. Billy bought his first telescope by accident. He was in the 9th grade and did not even dream of such a luxury. Catherine took it with her to New York. She thought it was impossible to miss a chance to breathe the air of the capital of culture. And for her, New York was also an opportunity to socialize with her friends. Billy was in New York not for the first time and did not stop shocked, wandering through its streets. If they had really made an open-air museum, you would step on the St. Nevsky. No cars, no advertisements, silence, and you look at each house as a personality. But the river of buses and cars flow past, but huge posters cover the ancient stucco, but merchants beckon at every corner. And it was a glorious day for New York, sunny, almost warm. Sometimes there was a biting wind, but that's what it's like here. They were walking along a narrow street, and foreigners were hurrying towards them, attracted by the bright domes of the Church of the Savior on the Blood. There was a lot more foreign speech around than American, and on one of the bridges, thrown over the dark water of the canal, sat on a folding stool and played the guitar guy. "Listen, and after all wonderfully plays," surprised even said Catherine, slowing down the steps, "This is Spanish. Listen, listen." Billy listened. "No," he said, "it's Ukrainian. You sing it yourself. The night is so dark, so bright, so clear. I see, you want to pick up the goals. No, you're lying. It's Romance Anonimo. Niche is just like that, but it's for Bandura. This is a pitar. This is the pitar." Billy looked at his mother's half-closed eyes, at the way she wiggled her chin, hearing the melody not only from outside, but also inside herself, and thought that she had more to give than he did. He is not capable of crying so easily, but he cannot enjoy the full pleasure of a moment like this. Others, however, consider this gift of hers precisely the gift of hystericalness. And a little farther away, against the wall of the house, leaning against it to escape the wind, sat a woman, not old, dyed blonde, and in front of her a box of discs. She put them on one after the other, and the melodies chalked the street, swirling and drifting away like the wind with the autumn leaves. Makarova dances at the Mariinsky well. What's she not, Natalie? Of course. Who doesn't remember? Natalie? Prima. She lives in America now. Ekaterina nodded. That was it. With Natalie and Romance Anonimo, they came out on Nevsky Prospect and turned to the long yellow building of the Gostiny Dvor. And while Ekaterina was looking at the new collections, "Go and have a coffee, I'll find you later," Billy wandered through the endless corridors of the Gostiny Dvor, looking for the cafeteria. And then he turned his head, but looked through the telescope, and somewhere in the unimaginable distance tiny beads, P's, a mark in the mind. "We are." Then it was as if his eyesight had developed, and in fact, armed with knowledge, Billy had learned to look. He noticed that if you look closely at tiny flattened Jupiter, you could see several stripes on the planet's disk. Jupiter became close, like a striped ball thrown by an unknown hand into the solar system. And later, Billy was able to see on this ball, in the famous red spot, so astronomers call a giant vortex, many centuries walking around the planet. What forces are raging in it? It was simply impossible to imagine this power on Earth. Billy was thrilled to discover the rings of Saturn. He even dreamed of them floating round and round, countless chunks of rock and ice, satellites of the planet. They were the personification of frozen eternity. Mars had the appearance of a reddish pea with a white polar cap. And so easily the mesmerizing lines from Bradbury's stories came to life when there it was in front of your eyes. And how many star clusters Billy saw! He knew that if he had a more powerful telescope, they would remind him of bee swarms. That's what they used to call them, star swarms. But Billy realized that to be alone with the sky, he had to get out of town. The city lights are a real nuisance. All those street lights blocking his way to the sky. He had to find someplace else. He didn't want to go to parks, to unlit corners of them. You don't know who you're gonna run into. Eventually, Billy found the right place. On the outskirts of the city rose the hills. Some of them were occupied by summer houses, but there was a road leading to the cottages, and you could drive up almost to the top. It was always deserted after 11 o'clock in the evening. The city lay far below, and the sky is a gorgeous starry sky right overhead. When it's so close, when there's nothing in the way of light or sound except a bird singing somewhere, it's as if the stars begin to speak. Billy already knew that the great philosophers of ancient times had received their revelations in the same way, by listening to the voice of the universe. Mama instructed Veronica to pick the last of the grapes. The whole family used to love the dacha. One of Veronica's first memories, her father was building a house. It was small white brick, and then it was covered with wooden carvings. And next to the pool, for the child to splash in. And the mother, flushed, happy, she always loved this labor on the ground plants thin branches. This will be a cherry tree, this will be an apple tree. Later, the parents build a fire. No, not for kebabs. Meat on coals both then, in her distant childhood, and now were a luxury out of reach. Her mother would hang an aluminum kettle over the fire and cook goulash. Whatever mom cooks always turns out delicious. She says you don't even have to study. It's in the genes. Her hands know what to throw into the pot. Millet bubbles, giving the brew a beautiful pearlescent color. Pieces of potatoes and fried lard rise in islands. Parsley leaves, plucked here, already from their own land, float like green ships. Veronica sips goulash and watches a small painted bug crawling along her leg. Its coloring looks like a ladybug, but the adults say it is a soldier. Veronica comes up with a full title for the insect, Ladybug Soldier. Then the parents split up. Veronica was 6 years old. She understood what had happened in a childish way. Daddy was taken away by Aunt Natalie. He packed very quickly because Mom was yelling at him. He took his suitcase and left. Yesterday he was there, and today he's gone. Without Dad, everything began to deteriorate. Mother, who was so good at cooking and treating Veronica if she was ill, was helpless in other matters. And there were always small catastrophes in the house. The faucet leaked, the closet door warped, the washing machine ran around the bathroom like a rabid beast. Mom decided not to call Dad no matter what happened. She cut out the phone numbers of various men on the hour firms from the local newspaper. She called for someone to come and fix things. They have already formed a familiar master for repair of refrigerators 2-meter uncle. Little Veronica was amused by the fact that his phone hung on his ear. It was called hands-free. John would treat the refrigerator and other customers would call him on the phone. My mom and Veronica had an old Oka, and the foreman worked with it for a long time. Veronica stood next to him, and John told her about the war. He was fond of World War II. His father was one of the few who survived the battle at Kursk. Veronica remembered that John's father had been a scout and had been at the site of the battle before anyone else. He was expecting an offensive, and it was impossible for him to discover himself. What was there to drink, to eat? He drank from the river, wolfishly, and at dawn a silver ribbon appeared in the distance. It was the enemy tanks, and when the shells began to burst, it became so dark that the sun was not seen for several days. Veronica waited for John not at all for the sake of Oka, but to listen to these. No, not fairy tales, but they mesmerize even more. The young guys from the emergency service also knew their family very well. Several times they had come at night when the faucet in the bathroom was broken and water began to whip over the edge of the sink and onto the floor. It wasn't uncommon for Mom to say the same thing when she finished checking her notebooks. Soon everything here will crumble to dust, and what will we do, Veronica? They live without a future. The dacha was most dilapidated. The first floor was made of brick and served as a pantry. Here they stored tools and film for greenhouses. A wooden staircase led to the second floor outside the house, so rickety that Veronica would not let her mother climb it, and she was afraid to climb it herself. On the second floor was the living room, a wooden chest with a sloping ceiling. The pink floral wallpaper was damp. An old narrow tacta, a table, a few chairs. No one had slept here for a long time, and the room looked uninhabited. There was a sort of balcony adjoining it. The floor was covered with slate sheets, and overhead, grapes twisted in a net. It didn't taste sour at all, but surprisingly fragrant. The heavy, dark bunches were fragrant with the aroma of fine wine. My mother froze the grapes and made compotes from them in winter, and in the purple of the drink was summer itself. At the end of that September day, Veronica felt like an acrobat, balancing on the balcony to reach the grapes. If you fall off, you'll not show your face. You'll be flying 3 meters. And down below was the swimming pool that my father built. Empty now, cracked and unsightly. If you fall into it, how can you call for help? It was even harder to get down. I had a heavy bag in each hand, and I could not even count on the rope railings. I could not grab them with my teeth, could I? It was already getting dark, and Veronica walked along the deserted dacha streets with the fear of who else might meet. She was accustomed to cut the corner and go down a steep path, barely visible in the tall grass. But in September it gets dark early, and now you can't see where to turn. Veronica put down her bags, at least stand for a while, so that her arms could rest. She raised her head, watching the sunset streak slowly disappearing over the horizon, and against the sky she saw a silhouette. On the hillside, a man was setting up something that reminded her of a telescope. Their eyes met, and Veronica, who had never before called out to strangers, suddenly asked, "Do you have this?" "I'm sorry, of course. But it's already dark, you can't see anything." And just as suddenly, Billy suggested, "Would you like to see it? That's when you showed me Venus, remember? I wonder what's going to happen next. Not in our time. They don't even go to Mars in our time. But someday maybe. Interstellar travel, cities on other planets, like your favorite sci-fi writers." They sat next to Billy, hugging their knees, and Veronica, burying her chin in the high collar of her sweater. It was already time to go back, because it was getting late, and soon her mother would start calling Veronica on her cell phone where her daughter was and who would walk her home. Veronica smelled of an unusual perfume. Her mother used to be very fond of perfume. She bought it herself, and her father gave it to her. In the closet on the mezzanine, there was a box of bottles, and not all of them were empty. Billy felt the fragrance noble and subtle. Veronica could tell him that the perfume was called Solemnity, that there was a note of bitter wormwood in it. And as always, even when she was sitting beside Billy, and at any moment she could touch him, take his hand, there was also an almost imperceptible note of the subtlest bitterness, as if he might suddenly disappear. In a kingdom apart. They'd come back. Billy always saw Veronica off. It was her mom's demand that he take her to the driveway. But if her mom hadn't said a word, they had a ritual of parting at Veronica's door. Veronica lived in a neighborhood that the authorities had long ago given up on. The houses, built in the 70s, brick 5-story buildings, were cramped, and there was little sun in the yards, and there were tall old trees, poplars. The housewives stretched ropes between the trunks and dried laundry. In June, the yards were drowned in white clouds of fluff. People walked on these clouds. It was as if God fulfilled his promise and took the poor to heaven. The rest of the time, the land was bare. The grass had long since been trampled, but there was a small part nearby, a lawn without any fence, a few birches, maples, and weeping willows, paths. I'm surprised this piece of land hasn't been built on yet. You can't go to the city to walk in the botanical garden in large parks. So this island of nature was as dear to the local residents as a sick girl from Andersen's fairy tale, her pea growing on the windowsill. Billy would leave the car, and he and Veronica would walk slowly along the path between the weeping willows. It was always dark by the time they returned. The path was lit by lanterns. In the fall, the leaves of the birch trees lay beneath their feet and glowed like heavenly coins, and maple leaves, while their few are perfection itself, crimson emerald, carved. Then the leaf all gathered strength, and Billy and Veronica walked with their feet buried in dry, rustling piles of leaves. And in winter there would be icy paths, and they would roll, Billy dashing first, and then waiting for her, arms outspread at the end of the path. until she, with frantic flapping of her hands, finally fell into his arms. It was now May. The air had not yet warmed, but the cold was as subtle as perfume. The cold air smelled of fresh earth and young leaves. Everything around them was suddenly dressed after winter, and Billy and Veronica felt as if they were not in the open air, but walking through the halls of a green palace. They were walking, and their fingers were intertwined. Veronica closed her eyes and walked for a while, seeing nothing around her. Even with her eyes closed, she was as peaceful as people usually are only in dreams. Wherever Billy turned, she would follow him. She felt him suddenly pull her sharply to the side. She opened her eyes. It turned out that a large branch was lying in the road, blocking their path. "What are you doing?" Billy asked in surprise. "Were you thinking about something?" "I would have fallen." She laughed. No, she couldn't tell him why she was suddenly walking like a blind woman. "Can I warm my other hand against you?" she asked, quickly came in from the other side and put her right palm in his warm, frozen really. 5 minutes ago, they got out of the heated car. "I'm just cold. You know, my mom and I used to go on vacation. We rented a little room. There were 2 of us, and the third one was a girl named Ariana from the Baltics. We arrived in February, but in the Caucasus there are no winter frosts, which we have at this time. Still, our hostess stoked the stove every day. Ariana slept by the Dutch oven. It was hot, even stuffy, and she would put on a sweater, tights, warm socks, and ask the landlady for a second blanket. She was a florist. She'd get soaked during the day outside, so I'm not the worst option. I want to ask you something." Billy stopped. He was standing now, blocking her way, and she could tell from his voice that he was very uncomfortable. "Will you marry me?" "What?" Her face twitched as if it had never even occurred to her. "What are you talking about?" And she got ready to go again. "Wait," he held her back. "You just don't want to? Then that's it. No questions asked. Or are you saying no because there's another reason?" "Wait, I don't get it. Why are you getting married in the first place?" "Well, girls are getting married, so hold them up. But who gets married at 18 nowadays?" "Exams are coming up. Then my father wants to send me to London to study." She lowered her head. He noted her grin and the fact that she could not raise her eyes to him for some time. "So you're saving yourself from London with me?" He kept his hands on her shoulders. Veronica couldn't find the word awe. "You understand everything. How am I going to live? I'm there and you're here?" He asked with despair. "A few years. How can we be apart? We're at war at home now." "Because of me?" Veronica was scared. "No, because of this England. I won't go. I won't go anyway. Let them do what they want. But no one should interfere with you and me. No parents, no parents. No more hiding, no more excuses. Enough. Your father and mother will never agree to me," Veronica said quietly, "in this London. They'll send you there anyway. And then they'll marry you off to a rich girl when they decide it's time." "Listen to me," Billy looked her in the eye, and now she couldn't look away. "Nobody's sending me anywhere. If my parents accept you, will you?" "I'll do it," Veronica said. "I'll close my eyes, I'll do it, and I'll live in this fairy tale for 10 minutes. I'm gonna dream. And then I'll open them." Billy leaned down and kissed her. It was the second hour of the night. No one was in the park, and they stood there, embraced, and drank each other in, and couldn't tear themselves away. For the first time, that thirst that had been languishing them broke through, and neither could recoil first. Everything ceased to matter. Veronica had forgotten that her mother was waiting for her at home, nor did Billy think that his parents might be worried. Just being together, that was all that mattered. Veronica couldn't remember her heart pounding like that before. In the sky, the wind was swaying the willow branches, and it seemed that the stars were swaying along with the young leaves. Mother, of course, stood at the window. She could not sleep until Veronica came home. Mom had to work tomorrow. She has 6 or 7 lessons every day, and she won't be able to keep up with the current numpties. They do not know how long their teacher will survive unfair, hurtful words. Almost every day Mom comes back with a headache. Sometimes she's so tired she can't even talk. She curls up on the sofa and lies there. Then she gets up. Veronica feels like she's taking an invisible broom and sweeping herself into a heap to rise again and move on with her life. Mom didn't turn away from the window when Veronica came into the room. Well, at least he saw her off, Mom sighed. She realized how brief this time of girlhood would be for Veronica to forget everything and wander with her beloved by the hand. Don't fail your exams, Mom said. I'm sorry. I forgive him because he still takes you to the driveway. If he didn't walk you home, I'd forbid it. No more guilt and no more excuses. Veronica remembered Billy saying, I'm very hungry, she said quietly, distracting her mother's thoughts. Why didn't your mom take you to a cafe for dinner? Parents don't give you money. Love and feed were synonyms for mom. Now she suffered that Veronica was hungry all evening and therefore neglected and unloved. Mom believed that she and Veronica were the two of them left to each other. In the album was kept the only photo where Mom was taken together with her father. At one time, Veronica wouldn't let her tear it up. You're so young here, so good. A dark-haired girl with a long braid and open, hot eyes. Mariana sang Ukrainian songs and wrote beautiful and sensitive poems in a notebook. And she went to study to be a teacher of Russian language and literature in order to share this beauty, which she herself felt so clearly in the word, with others. And next to her was a tall guy in a military uniform with the epaulettes of a senior lieutenant. They had met a few days before this photograph was taken. A group of military men on leave met the girls in the hall of a movie theater. Their seats were next to each other. Mom didn't have to travel to garrisons. Father served in the neighborhood, trained young soldiers in the unit. He firmly knew that he fulfills his duty to the motherland, and how much she pays him for it is on her conscience. An officer is not supposed to humiliate himself by looking for additional income. The duties of a wife were obvious to him in the morning. On the shoulders should hang a clean suit jacket, in the house reign army cleanliness and order, and the lid from the pot with steaming borscht must be removed the minute her husband opens the front door. Mom never felt sorry for herself and was ready to cook, scrape, and wash until late at night, sick or healthy. But Veronica was born and turned out to be a weak, sickly child. The fragile girl seemed to her father to be from another planet. With a strong, throaty boy, everything would have been clear. From the very beginning, his father would start to raise a real man and a soldier. And all these dolls, bows, tied throat. In the middle of the night, my mother would get up to warm Veronica's milk and to take away her cough. She turned on the light in their one-room apartment and saw her husband unknowingly covering his head with a pillow. Maybe you'll take a vacation and go somewhere in a preventorium, have a rest? Mom suggested, forgetting about herself again. My father liked it at the health center. He was an excellent dancer, and for 3 weeks of vacation danced Natalie, a cheerful, giggly blonde. When he came back, he wasn't himself. Walked so gloomy, did not raise his head. Told my mother Veronica a few years later. I'd all inquired about what and how, but he kept silent. Then he said, Mariana, something terrible has happened. I thought he'd been recruited into foreign intelligence, and he said, Mariana, I've met another woman. It was the only time in my life when my mother beat my father. I don't remember what I grabbed then. Anything I could find. A pot lid, I think. He only had his hand over his head. You see, I wanted to do what was best. You're sick. He's in Zoria. I did the repairs without him, wallpapered the house. It's a hard service. Let him rest, I think. He did, the bastard. My father decided that he had been punished enough, and now he could leave with a clear conscience. He packed his things and moved in with Natasha. Apparently, even she did not believe that everything was solved so easily, and the ex-wife will not try to return her husband, at least for the sake of the child. So Natalie insisted. The father appealed to his superiors and he was transferred, where the young couple departed. Reminder of the father remained a receipt for alimony. Once a month appeared in the mailbox, and Mom's firm conviction that neither she herself will no longer try to build a family life. The second time I can't stand it with my face on the table. Nor Veronica will have no luck with this case. What is love? Deception, fake gold, only pain. In order not to be alone in old age, it's better to have a child and then kick the man out. We'll grow up, Mom said. In her heart, she had no doubt that this is the only option that awaits Veronica. I'll help. And the main thing for you now is to finish the institute and find a good job, so that you don't depend on any lousy guy in your life. Mom did not like Billy, but tolerated because he was from a decent family brought up, and the courtship ritual, remembered by my mother since his youth, performed rigorously. He asked permission to take Veronica for a walk and brought her back on time. Mom thought that nothing serious would come out of this relationship. Veronica was no match for that boy. What's the word these days? Major? But if Mom was afraid to think about it, let her daughter have a nice, healthy baby. You can tell by Billy's good blood. and the grandparents on the other side will help. It's so hard to raise a child alone. And yet her mother wanted Veronica to be just her daughter, with the simple worries of what to wear, where to go, what book to read, so that no men would invade their little world. Veronica went to her room. When her father left, her mother exchanged their one-room apartment in the center for a two-room on the outskirts. The school where she worked was nearby. Veronica got her own room tiny. The window overlooked the garages, a shabby view. But Veronica remembers how she sat little on the table, and her mother put her shoes on, and the late December dawn was blue outside the window. "Look at the color of the sky like the eyes of a princess," her mother said. Veronica remembered. Deep blue. People don't have such eyes. But princesses. Opposite was the same 5-story building, its windows lit up with multicolored lights. Veronica could look at them for a long time. The lamp glows behind the green curtains, and the room reminds her of a pond where mermaids live. And on the neighboring window strings of Christmas tree garlands were strung and blue stars were shimmering. But one window was special to Veronica. There, the tenants went to bed late. At 1 o'clock and at 2 in the morning, their lights were on. And it was good, waking up from an unexpected terrible dream, to pull back the curtain, to look out and see that the window was glowing. Someone was awake there. And once someone unknown from there started a game of bunnies with Veronica. It was a sunny day. She went to the window and felt a hot ray on her cheek. She moved aside. The bunny hopped after her and nestled against her face again. Someone was standing at a familiar window, holding the mirror in his hand. Veronica leaned to one side or the other, laughing at the game, and had treated the window as a friend ever since. Now Veronica sat on her narrow bed. The room was warm. Veronica wrapped her arms around her knees, her chintz shirt in pink flowers, her hair disheveled. She imagined that Billy could be with her and would be soon, and her face flamed. She really wanted to call Yasa, her classmate and best friend, but it wasn't just deep night anymore. Dawn would be breaking soon, and she had to wait for morning. Veronica didn't want to sleep, but she forced herself to lie down, tucked a pillow under her cheek, and covered herself with a blanket. Suddenly, she fell asleep so soundly that she was hardly awakened by the familiar muffled crack of the alarm clock. Naomi was a small, dark-haired girl. There was a surprising femininity in her whole appearance. Her thick, close-cropped hair was styled as if by itself, curling over her temples and cheeks, and eyes crystal clear, green. Naomi's family lived as modestly as Verena's. They rarely bought new clothes, but Naomi was constantly preoccupied with closet issues and came up with a very successful. She sewed herself a skirt, then unravels a sweater and knit a fishnet sweater. The track on the tights was for Naomi a serious upset, much more than a triple in geometry. Even jewelry she made selflessly, and for her birthday she made Veronica Indian earrings from leather, which were admired by all the girls in the class. After graduation, Naomi wanted to study nursing and work somewhere in the sanatorium. Quiet, peaceful, pine forest, she said dreamily, no matter how cold it was outside, and the buildings are warm. Smells of mineral water, winter garden flowers. I would do procedures for the sick. And myself too, there are many cosmetic ones there. Veronica had been friends with Naomi since the first grade, and in recent years the girls had been sitting at the same desk. Veronica kept looking at Naomi. She couldn't wait to tell her about yesterday's proposal. But where had she gone when the lesson was about to start? Naomi ran into the classroom at the last minute. Her plaid dress was held together by a wide sash, waist as thin as an actress in the last century. "Where have you been, mother?" "You see," explained Naomi, panting, laying out her textbooks on the desk. "I washed my dress yesterday and hung it on the balcony, but it didn't dry. I didn't even have time for breakfast. I had to iron it dry. Billy asked me to marry him." Veronica wanted to say nonchalantly as a cursive, but on the face, uncontrollably blossomed a smile. "Wow," Naomi whispered, shocked. The historian was already entering the classroom. "And when?" "Last night." "That's not what I meant. When does he want you two to get married?" "Right after graduation." "Are his parents okay with it?" "Naomi," the history teacher said, "why don't you let me start class? It's because of people like you that I can't explain anything. You don't shut your mouths, so open your notebooks, write down the new topic, and then read the textbook and take notes." The class looked at each other. Last year, the old teacher who taught them history retired, and the principal hired this Angelica. At the first lesson, Angelica reported that she was not just a teacher, but a major, and had previously worked in the colony. So she put discipline first, and then knowledge. And so it went. The lessons were quiet, because for the slightest whisper Angelica made her stand, or even demanded that the offender leave the classroom. And she wouldn't allow anyone to attend class without a parent. But she could not explain the material. She was confused about dates. Over the years of service in the police, she forgot everything. Where that Alexander Nevsky and where Macedonian. Students' future humanities at first resented, went in droves to the director, demanding to remove the major. But there was no substitute for Elena. Parents of high school students gave up and began to look for tutors. We had to wait for recess. And then Naomi poured Veronica with questions, the main of which was whether the wedding would really take place. Don't jinx it. What are you afraid of? Even princes marry the wrong people nowadays. Well, thank you, I'm out of the trash already. Did you give me a videotape? Leslie came up to them with a notebook. There was no head of the class, but Leslie had taken the position on her own initiative a long time ago. Her father was a businessman and her mother was an artist. It was Leslie's mother who had once made their class famous by drawing such wall newspapers that the others could only envy. She also provided costumes for amateur performances, and Leslie's father provided a bus when the class went on excursions or concerts. Naskia's mother was feared. It began when Angelica, a tall girl from a dysfunctional family, twisted Leslie's arm during a fight. An hour later, the hand had to be repaired in the trauma center. Another hour later, Leslie's mom came running to the school. 2 teachers were having a hard time holding her back because she wanted to tear Angelica apart. She was like a bulldog. She was like a homing torpedo. We managed to fight off the juvenile delinquent with great difficulty. They agreed to put Angelica on the register in the children's police room. Since then, Leslie in the class, although not loved for aplomb and self-confidence, but did not touch a finger. During the last year, she collected money for the graduation party. This process was not over. There were a lot of expenses to be spent. Gifts for teachers, a farewell gift to her native school, video shooting, a boat ride, a restaurant. At the meeting, some parents stuttered that it would be possible to organize a holiday in the canteen of the school. But the rest were indignant that it was an unforgettable day and they should rent a good restaurant so as not to spoil the celebration for their children, who were used to a different standard of living. Veronica and Naomi looked at each other. "We're not taking pictures," Veronica said. Leslie scribbled something down in her notebook and said, stepping away. "And then don't take the discs from other people to rewrite. Otherwise, others will pay, and you will get a freebie. I'll warn the cameraman not to shoot all those who are not recorded, unless they accidentally get into the frame. For God's sake," Naomi said softly, "to look at your faces afterwards." "You know," she pounced on Veronica again, "I have a hat and some beautiful white gloves left from my older sister, in a box on the mezzanine. I'll get it. Mom keeps everything." She says, "Naomi, don't get married so fast. I haven't had time to say anything. If you go to the registry office, I'll go to the world." After school, Naomi and Veronica used to walk home slowly. They walked past the fresh bread stand, where they bought hot apple puffs, past the city park where the ducks swam in the pond, and the girls would throw them the last crumbs. But today Veronica was on class duty with Anthony, and Naomi, sighing, went home alone. Anthony, a tall, blonde-haired boy with an attentive, tenacious gaze. Years later, she remembered his face. There was nothing significant about it. Burned eyebrows and eyelashes, a barely noticeable scattering of freckles, plump lips, but those gray eyes. Verena's mother, having seen Dimka once, said, "What a boy has beautiful eyes with a mist. They seem to glow." Anthony was always dressed in the same protective colored light jacket, collar open, visible cowskin. Usually the duty officers divided the class in half. "You wash half, and I'll wash half. Wipe the blackboard, water the flowers, I can handle the mop," Anthony said. He scrubbed the floors with surprising dexterity. He twisted the heavy rag in a sporadic motion, scrubbed the worn linoleum, and the classroom was clean. "When you go to the army, ask to join the Navy," Veronica advised, watering a strange plant in the form of a green stick, from the top of which leaves spread out in a fan. In class they called it Elite's cock. "Your ship will always be shiny." Anthony didn't say anything, just looked at her. "No, seriously, where are you going?" Veronica asked. Anthony answered reluctantly, mopping under the teacher's desk. "Polytechnic, I'll probably try. If I don't pass, I'll be rated for service." Veronica sighed sympathetically. Polytechnic seemed to her little better than the army. All that horrible math, blueprints. At school, she treated the exact sciences as a punishment. They were hard for her. And here, voluntarily. Are you really interested in all this? She made a gesture as if she were drawing. There's not much I want. There's also such a thing as real life. Anthony raised his head and suddenly smiled at her. Veronica hadn't seen him smile like that in all her years, brief but bright and trusting. And she also remembered that he went first in his biology class, and all the animals in the living corner adored him. The parrots would sit on his outstretched arm for long periods of time, and the white rats would almost kiss him. He put them on his shoulders, several at a time, when he cleaned the cages. This guy should be a soldier. Who could he kill? But you couldn't study biology in their town. You had to leave, and Anthony probably couldn't do that. His mother was sick. The Polytechnic Institute was 2 bus stops away, and the competition was low year after year. Where do you think you'll go? Anthony asked. I don't know yet. Anthony, everything is still hanging by a thread. She suddenly wanted to tell Anthony how scared she was. Would everything work out? But she couldn't tell him, so she held back. And he felt something stood near her, hesitated. Finally, he stepped back. When the cleaning was finished, they locked the classroom and went out onto the school porch. A warm wind blew in their faces. The gardens were already blooming before school. Anthony asked. Now he looked at Catherine over a volume of Saltykov-Shchedrin. What is there to be afraid of? He asked. No, he decidedly did not understand. Billy will bring into the house some girl from which at best will pick up bad manners. It would be a shame to show the girl not only to his acquaintances, but even to the closest friends of the house, because she'd be vulgar, definitely vulgar, and dressed, God knows how, and start cackling all over the house, and we'll have to fight with her to obey her way of life established in the family. And Catherine is not a warrior. She's been queen of the family for a long time, but now she will be queen mother, and reigning will be this Veronica, who, of course, will immediately give birth to a child to secure her place. Billy's blood will flow. Oh my God, it won't be a baby. It'll be a travesty of her son. Archie, we've got to do something, Catherine said, desperation in her voice. I do not understand what you kill, replied Archie. Now all young people play independent, all live civil marriage. Well, consider it a trial if it makes you feel better. What civil marriage, Archie? Come to your senses, passionately whispered Catherine. She will cling to him with all her paws. Fabulous, who knows who? She could be in our house babysitter, at best governess. Sure, we'll draw up a prenup. They'll live together for a few years while Billy goes to school. Look, I kind of like it. It's better than having him out clubbing and running around with sketchy girls. Let him play the faithful husband, come home at night, study. But if that girl gets a little crazy, you think you'd let her go wild? Archie's smile was surprisingly gentle. Catherine, if you've trained me for our infinitely long life, you've trained me to eat with a noodle. Catherine also could not bear to smile. It was true. Archie came from a working family. Once he was a hard-working, extremely persistent guy. Graduated from the institute a little more and with a red diploma. But when he got a job at the plant, he found himself not in production, not in drawings and schemes, but first in Komsomol and then in party work. Then there was a career ladder with steep steps, city committee, regional committee. Then, when the power changed, ministry and the crown chair of the Minister of Industry. With Catherine they met at the stage of the city committee. Tickets to the theater of opera and ballet to get at that time was not easy, and to sit in the box meant belonging to the cast of The Chosen. Archie was not a connoisseur of art. Opera, he could not stand it at all. If he visited with friends Traviata or Rigoletto, he fell asleep in the middle of the first act. If only they were a little quieter howling, waking up at intermission, he said to his companions, trying not to notice the sneer in their eyes. But the ballet, the spectacle, is very good. Archie hardly noticed the male dancers, but what girls in the ballet, and the incomparable Ekaterina Volkova, the prima donna. He realized then that she was the queen. During the support, she regally soared in the hands of her partner in a snow-white dress. Proudly raised on a swan-necked small head, smoothly combed dark striped wings falling on the forehead, and chiseled arms raised upward in a victorious gesture when she's on stage. You don't see anyone else. She is the only one like that. They were introduced. The director of the theater small beads scattered in front of Archie that promised him to make repairs in the opera house. And the director was ready to take the stars out of the sky, not only to introduce the prima donna. So when they were introduced to each other, Catherine treated Archie with restraint just enough to not notice the contempt. A young man heavy in a baggy suit face, as if an axe cut down, did not make any impression on her. But most of all, he was boring, so boring, nothing to talk about. But the boring acquaintance turned out to be indispensable. He got all the medicine for Katia's grandmother when she had a stroke, and arranged that the best neurologist in the region came to consult the old lady every week. Archie's main concern was why Catherine had become pale lately. Shouldn't she go to a sanatorium, especially since the velvet season had begun? She agrees. Here's the voucher. It was he, having visited the Volcott's house, squinted, examined the current ceiling, and looked out the window with vague words. And yes, the neighborhood. A month did not pass, as Katina's mother and grandmother moved into a spacious apartment in the center of the city, and Catherine moved in with Archie, and he took her away in a black car. The back seat of the car was piled with so many white and red roses, which Prima did not get even after the premiere. They say that over the years, spouses become more alike. How different were Archie and Catherine in his younger years, and then got along, fused, and each acquired some of the features of each other. Archie began to distinguish the noble valiants. He now dressed with great taste, quite decently versed in the arts, and the government considered him an excellent orator. Catherine felt protected from the storms of life. She appeared in her self-confidence, which she previously lacked. In the choreographic school, where she now taught, neither the director nor colleagues not only dared not raise her voice, but talked of her almost subservient. And Archie did not forget to note that it was her wife who had given the Volodarski's house an aristocratic note, and there was no shame in receiving any of the most distinguished guests. And now this wench would appear, and a war would start in a separate kingdom. Archie had already fallen asleep, and Catherine was still holding his hand, as if looking for support, and if he woke up, he would feel her tears on his shoulder. Hanging up his coat, Billy asked Angelica's housekeeper, "Are the parents home?" "Catherine is back, resting. Archie's not home yet." Billy knew where his mother was, in the fountain room. It was the brightest room in the house, with a window that took up a whole wall, and everything was bright and colorful. Catherine loved painted clay pots. She brought them from Spain, Greece, Mexico. Not pots, but works of art. So many plants lived in them that Billy didn't even try to remember their names anymore. And part of the room was simply partitioned off, and dwarf trees grew behind a border lined with colored stones. This room was always alive with the odors of forest earth, water, flowers. Catherine did not like plants that do not smell of anything. "Forgive God, paper something something," she said squeamishly. And in the winter garden of her constantly something bloomed and fragrant. Jasmine smelled subtly and sweetly. Waves of fragrance came from the corner where lilies bloomed. Catherine, thank God, in her life, you might say, did not fall in love. She came from an old aristocratic family. Her father, an officer, died after the Great War, an accident at the exercises. Her mother, a beautiful Polish woman, never married again. And it was difficult for her to raise her daughter, as it was for all widows. Already dilapidated clothes many times sewn over, and the duty meal in the house was pearl soup. Catherine tried not to put her mother in unnecessary expenses, not that on ice cream on the streetcar, did not ask, ran on foot. While her father was alive, her mother didn't work, and after that she got a job as a ticket girl at the only movie theater in the city at that time. So movies became the only luxury available to Katia. Then there were trophy movies, and looking at Western actresses, she believed and did not believe that you could be so beautiful, wear such luxurious dresses. And when her mother suggested that she enter a choreographic school, Catherine agreed with joy. To study ballet meant to open the door to the most beautiful world. Catherine entered easily. She inherited a lot from her mother: thin bones, proportionality, graceful movements. Later, teachers and educators repeatedly noted and her reasonableness. Catherine never once cried, did not ask to go home from the dormitory. They did not realize that this was an expression of the girl's love for her mother. After all, come home and mom poor, again to worry about her, what to wear, what to feed. And in the dormitory, everything is on the government's dime. But the love of Catherine, who was left out of business mom was not around, found another application. The girl passionately, self-consciously fell in love with ballet. She practiced frantically and soon was the best on the course. The only time Catherine was charmed by a man, an artist, then she was already working at the opera and ballet theater. The company came from Washington, and with one of the soloists, Catherine danced Sleeping Beauty. At first, it was admiration for the skill of the capital's dancer. What a partner she would have been. Artists of this level in the local theater was not available. With Katya, they understood each other with half a glance, and she felt that also made a great impression on the Muscovite. But she was scared. She felt that falling in love was beginning to take a huge place in her soul. She no longer thought about the ballet, about her role, but only about him. Along with joy, she experienced a distinctly perilous danger. She would soon be gone as an actress, and then humiliation, dependence. Ekaterina stopped off stage to communicate with her partner. She did not answer his calls, and after a few days the Muscovites left. With the present husband, Ekaterina was connected something like a good buddy. But now, calling from memory that half-forgotten short feeling, she remembered, above all, the pain she experienced when the artist left. The arrival of this girl in Billy's life would not be painless either. She knew her son. I wanted to ask, Catherine said a little audibly, have you talked to Veronica about, well, have you promised her anything? Maybe it's wise to wait, at least until third year? Billy smiled and shook his head. He knew his mom's tricks. Hand me some drops from the table. My eyes are getting dark. Maybe you'll go out of your way to do this and that. He also knew that, despite her fragility, Catherine was in better health than her husband. Archie's blood pressure was seriously high, but he loved his mother too much to let her know he understood her game. Well, maybe at least. Civil marriage? Catherine made one last concession. No, Mom. A real wedding, and even with a wedding in the church. But why? Catherine did not just open her eyes and lifted herself up. The medicine was starting to take effect, but now she was just stunned. I won't insult Veronica by offering to live with her for a trial. But aren't you putting that girl on a pedestal? Do you know how much it hurts when idols fall? Billy raised his hand to stop me. Mom, I know there's a lot of words coming out right now. And what I'm gonna say, you're not gonna listen to. You've got your own picture in your head. That I'm a poor, naive boy being used. And so on and so forth. So for the first, and hopefully last time, I'm going for an ultimatum. You can rest easy. I'm not going to be an astronomer. I'll be a lawyer, a diplomat, a plumber, take your pick. But you take Veronica, and I don't want to see any of those faces around her. She's family, period. But you're forcing someone we don't know. Mom. Catherine shrugged nervously, this agonizing feeling of his own powerlessness. So, on Saturday I'll bring her, and everything will be as you like to say, Camilfo. But at least in a nutshell, Tony, what to expect? Billy paused, searching for words. You'd say she's a regular girl, he began. A regular girl from the back alley? Mom, where's this snobbery coming from? Don't you have enough talented girls in your school who are not from the streets? But I'm only teaching them, not expecting grandchildren from them. Bravo, go on now, quote your favorite, talk about what blood means. Remember, ul time atum. When the door closed behind her son, Catherine held her temples and exhaled several times with a half smile, as if to say, wow. Catherine was on her way to see the fortune teller. She had known Anna for 2 years already. She had been brought together with her by a friend. Catherine did not go to her often, only when everything in her life came to a wedge. In such cases, someone goes to a psychotherapist, someone to a priest, but she went to Anna. Anna lived in the black house. Oh, how Ekaterina Sergeyevna liked this house on the embankment. Built of large porous slabs, really almost black in color, the house with arches and columns, with narrow windows, it seemed not just ancient. There was something of a castle in it, and of a prison. But with its picturesque facade, inside the house was in disrepair. The huge entryway seemed to have been abandoned years ago. The fireplace was still there, always cold, with only traces of soot on the plaster. On the wide staircase with low, marble steps, some of the carpet shreds were attached. A window with a cast iron lattice. The sky through the dusty glass always seemed gray. Anna lived on the second floor. The front doors here were also ancient, huge, and the air itself seemed rumbling. Catherine knew almost nothing about Anna, and had never asked her to tell her about herself. It seemed to her that fortune tellers must not have a past. She didn't know what religion Anna practiced, whether she believed in black magic or Buddhism. But when Anna opened the door, tall, wavy black hair falling loosely down her back, a long bright satin robe, and the smell of oriental incense. When Anna took her hands in her warm palms for a moment, Catherine sighed as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. They walked down the long corridor. A light tinkling could be heard. Everything was jingling on Anna, bracelets and long earrings, and carved gilded beads. They passed into the study, where there was semi-darkness. Only a small table lamp was burning here. Catherine sighed and sank into a deep, soft armchair. Streams, curls, smoke from smoking sticks was rising, and already the smell inexplicably soothed. Anna, look what's going to happen. My son wants to get married. Maybe some kind of a turnaround. Catherine had a hard time with that word. Charms, reversals are cheap. But what to do? What to do? Time is running out. Veronica is coming. Anna put her finger to her lips and said, "Give me your hands." Catherine threw her jacket on the back of the chair, remained in a thin sleeveless t-shirt. Lean back, relax, close your eyes and put your hands here. Anna drew a light portable table. In a small bowl she diluted fragrant oil, took a brush. Catherine obeyed, closed her eyes. What bliss! The oil was warm. The gentle touch of the brush to her fingers, palms, wrists, higher and higher she went. Anna was drawing some invisible patterns, secret signs. Anger, fear, rejection of the events were leaving. In return came peace, peace. The brush slid across the face, and his features completely smoothed out. Anna stood behind the chair, gently removed the hairpins from Catherine's hair, and plunged her fingers into the thick strands. Anna's eyes were closed too. She whispered something, and her fingers slid. When she withdrew, with her hand still raised, Catherine slept with her head thrown back. And if at home she did not allow herself to relax completely even in her sleep, now one could see a not young, very tired woman. Her face sagged, and sometimes a light snore broke through. Anna returned to the desk, took a deck of cards, shuffled them, and began to lay them out. She looked at the cards as if she couldn't believe it, and with a quick movement she mixed them. She laid them out again. When the last one was laid, she shook her head slowly. Then she got up. She went, rustling her dressing gown, to the shelves, took a large crystal ball on a stand, carried it to the table. She sat down and began to stare at it, running her long fingers through her hair. If Billy had been here, he would have said that Anna resembled a goddess bent over a glowing planet. When Catherine woke up, Anna told her, "You don't need a lapel pin." "What? Are you saying my son will be happy with this girl?" "No." Anna shook her head. "This family will not be. But they're getting married in a month. This girl, don't be afraid. She won't be in your house for long. And remember, I've seen it. She's not the one who's gonna get you in trouble. And remember, it's nobody's fault." "What trouble?" Catherine was scared. "I feel she'll do something to Igor." "No." Anna turned around and pointed at the crystal ball. "Your son is just as pure. Don't fear for him." "But can you tell me more? What did you see?" Catherine begged. "Do you feel better now?" Anna answered with a question. Catherine listened to herself. Yes, even incomprehensible to her words, fortune teller could not change that state of clear reconciliation, which was now in her soul. And because, yes, easier, much easier. That's how you live your life. To keep all this from rising in her soul, Anna's singing hand made a graceful movement resembling a slow whirlwind. It could have been different if you had given him a gift. Let him go. Who? Billy? I mean, we should just let this wedding go off with a bang. That's not what I'm talking about. But don't think about it. That's what I'm saying. Everyone goes their own way, and even if you feel like you are the one deciding, in reality they are deciding for you. Go on, and remember, no one is to blame for anything. The dinner party was to begin in half an hour. Billy and Veronica sat in Billy's room, waiting to be called. Both were laughing nervously. Veronica wore a knee-length black dress for the occasion, her only dress, but she had no jewelry to match. Only earrings of such crystal glittered in her ears. When the sun's rays fell on them, the earrings cast colored bunnies, and I wanted to watch the play of the glare. Veronica was sitting on the bed, and Billy, across from her in the chair. Veronica swayed slightly. The bed seemed royal to her. "Nice place you've got here," she said. Billy's room was at the far end of the house, so that he could have some semblance of a separate life. But it was Catherine's favorite color, lilac. Everything was in the same tone. The long curtains of heavy silk, the rug on the floor, the coverlet on the bed, an antique bed with carved metal headboards. The mirror had a carved frame of equally fine workmanship. Nearby, 2 lamps on a table held gold-colored lanterns. "This room looks like a poem by Alexander Bloch," Veronica said. "Make your mom happy. He's the one who picked out everything here." "Who's stricter, mom or dad?" Billy shrugged his shoulders. "Dad's charming. His position, so to speak, obliges him. You'll like him." Mom's creative. It's interesting to talk to people like that, but it's not easy to live with them." He tried to choose the words softly. Veronica shuddered. "I'm going to get it from her. I'm dressed wrong. I'm sitting wrong." Billy shook his head. "It's all settled now. You're part of the family now." And then Veronica imagined her mom alone for the first time. Here she comes home from work and opens the door to the dark, empty house. Only their gray and striped cat, Timosha, meows and runs out to meet her. And when mom has a headache, she often has a headache, so much so that she has no strength to get up from the couch and take a pill. No one will give her the pill. Veronica goes off into her adult life, and mom will become a child more and more every year, needing care. How will she be cared for from across town? Billy asked, noticing the change in Veronica's expression. "You know, you have everything gorgeous just." But she couldn't find the words. The thought of her mom was so sudden and painful. But she finally said, carefully, "I'd like to live somewhere between yours and my mom's. Just the 2 of us." Billy's answer was a complete surprise to her. "And that's what I want." Dinner was served in the small dining room where the family usually gathered. Billy saw this as a good sign. Only the immediate family was invited here. But maybe mom had just decided that there was no need for a parade to honor some girl from the back alley. The small dining room was especially cozy. A small oval table draped with 2 linen tablecloths, cream and gold over it. Chairs covered with covers with a pattern of half-blossomed roses, and a pink garland on a chandelier hung low over the table. Softly lettuce curtains and green cabinets in the corners. Catherine's favorite tea and coffee sets were kept there. She gravitated toward the beautiful teapots with intricate, molded porcelain designs. And the housekeeper Angelica always brewed tea according to complicated recipes, so the shades of flavor came gradually, as in a good perfume, first the first subtle smell, then the heart, and finally the top note. The parents were already seated at the table. Archie stood up to greet Veronica and pulled out a chair for her. He took a seat at the head of the table, Catherine at his right hand and Veronica now at his left. Billy sat down beside her. Veronica kept her cool, at least outwardly. Barely had Angelica poured her a ladle of soup, as Veronica threw a rather. Whether she was hungry Billy didn't know, but she ate without showing appetite, just like her mother. "I take it you're graduating this year too, Veronica?" Archie asked. "And then where?" "My mom's way, I guess." "Yes, I have to. Archie nodded. English is in a terrible state these days. I, Veronica, didn't abuse it myself at school, as they say. I got B's. Not much more than that. Comsomol work took all my strength. But what is being done now? It's impossible to convey. You know, I have to live through a lot of documents, Stein. So believe me, I'm horrified. My young people, ministry rats, all with higher education, or even with 2, will write so much that you can laugh, or even invite an interpreter to explain to me, an old man, what they wanted to say. The country chased after money in its time, decided that you can't make much money in the humanities. And now we're dealing with, oh dear mother." Archie put his hand to his cheek. Billy sensed that his father's friendly tone had touched Veronica. She obviously hadn't expected such attention, and she answered him with a tentative smile, which already showed sincerity. "And you, Veronica, you probably read a lot, don't you?" "Our Billy likes it too. That's rare these days. It's nice to meet such an attentive look, as you are looking at me now. It's the look of a reading person." Angelica put a big plate in front of Archie, a roast. He must have been cooked separately, because all the others were served much smaller plates, and on them, stewed vegetables, herbs, fish unknown to Veronica. "Not a serious meal at my house," Archie said. "Maybe, Veronica, you can keep me company later. We'll eat like human beings. Or are you a stickler for healthy eating too?" "Why are you looking at my hands?" Catherine suddenly asked. Veronica blushed slightly, but her voice sounded calm. I've always wondered how people who sing at the opera talk in the world, how their voices sound in ordinary conversation. Can one guess their power and beauty? Just as interesting are the ordinary gestures of a person for whom movement is a profession. Well, Catherine asked quickly, sharply. Beautiful. Really just beautiful. It's hard to look away. The slight sound that escaped Catherine's lips was reminiscent of mmm. She, accustomed to assessing her ballet girls from the point of view of a classical figure or marriage. Snag did not like Veronica's appearance at all, which promised in the future heavy womanhood. Didn't you take dancing lessons yourself, Veronica? It was Archie again. I did, nodded Veronica. In the 7th grade, an aunt came to us and began to persuade us. She promised that she would teach us everything in the world. Modern dancing, ballroom dancing. She got all the girls so excited. But when we went to see her at the Palace of Culture, she probably went to all the schools, and there was nowhere to stand. So this madam organized a selection. And you didn't pass? I didn't pass. I was almost the first one out. You had to dance, a waltz, a 1, 2, 3 across the room. I immediately got confused about which foot to start on, and the lady yelled, "That's enough." Did you know that, Katinka? Archie nodded. Then they gathered us together, all the expelled, and they started to console us because some of the girls were crying. They told us to do something else. I was sent to a puppet theater to work with the puppets. I needed those puppets. What are you interested in now? Veronica shrugged slightly. Art, yes, I still love it. But I can't travel. The theater and the Philharmonic Hall are on the other side of town. And then there's graduation. Books remain. I read a lot. You're not interested in politics? It's not my thing. Well, thank God. I respect Takamada immensely, but I wouldn't want there to be dozens and hundreds of such ladies. It's still a man's business. Archie got up. Well, darlings, let me say goodbye. They're expecting me at the ministry at 3. As he passed Catherine, he touched his lips to her hair and whispered, "Quite a nice girl, and should not have worried in advance." But Catherine sat tense, silent, and he still did not understand what she thought about it.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.